You stand in the middle of a crowded street. People are everywhere, shouting, pushing, trying to get closer. You can smell sweat and ale and something else, something metallic. In front of you is a wooden platform. On that platform stands a person in chains. Their crime has already been decided. Their sentence has already been announced. Your job is not to judge them. Your job is not to question whether they deserve what is about to happen. Your job is to inflict pain, methodically, publicly, for as long as the authorities have ordered. You have a whip in your hand, or a branding iron heated until it glows red, or a set of iron clamps designed to crush bone. The crowd wants a show. The government wants obedience. And you are the instrument they use to deliver both. When you are finished, the person on the platform will carry the marks of what you did for the rest of their life. And you will go home, wash the blood off your hands, and wait for the next order. This was reality across Europe and colonial America throughout the 1600s and 1700s, a period when punishment was designed to be visible, brutal, and terrifying. Societies operated under the belief that crime could only be controlled through fear. Prisons existed, but they were expensive to maintain. Execution was reserved for the most serious offenses. For everything in between, the solution was public corporal punishment, whipping, branding, mutilation. The goal was not rehabilitation. It was humiliation and deterrence. Authorities wanted criminals marked so everyone would know what they had done. They wanted punishments carried out in public so crowds would see the consequences of breaking the law. And they needed people willing to carry out those punishments. Professional punishers were employed by local governments, courts, and colonial authorities. The job was legal, necessary, and permanent, but it only existed because society had decided that cruelty was an acceptable form of justice. His name was Samuel. He was 29 years old when he became a public punisher. He had worked as a tanner for most of his adult life, a job that already made him an outcast because of the smell and the filth. When the previous punisher in his town died, the magistrate needed a replacement quickly. Samuel was out of work. The tannery had gone out of business, and he had a wife and infant son to support. The magistrate knew Samuel was desperate. He offered him the position. The pay was steady, better than most manual labor, and it came with a small stipend for housing. Samuel asked what the work involved. The magistrate did not soften the truth. He would whip convicted criminals in the town square. He would apply branding irons to their skin. He would operate the pillory and the stocks. He would carry out whatever sentence the court ordered. Samuel felt his stomach turn. But he thought about his son. He thought about the fact that he had no other prospects. He accepted the job. The magistrate told him to report the following morning. There was already a sentence waiting to be carried out. The first punishment Samuel administered was a public whipping. The convicted man had been found guilty of theft. The sentence was 30 lashes. Samuel arrived at the town square early. A wooden post had been installed in the center, and iron rings were bolted to it. A crowd was already gathering. Public punishments were treated like events. People brought their children. Vendors sold food. It was entertainment. Samuel felt sick. 2 constables dragged the convicted man to the post and chained his wrists to the rings. stretching his arms above his head. His back was bare. Samuel was handed a whip, a thick leather strap attached to a wooden handle. The magistrate stood nearby, watching. Samuel had no choice. He raised the whip and brought it down across the man's back. The crack was loud. The man screamed. A red welt appeared immediately. Samuel hesitated. The magistrate shouted at him to continue. Samuel raised the whip again, and again, and again. By the 10th lash, the man's back was covered in blood. By the 20th, he was barely conscious. Samuel's arm was shaking. His hands were slick with sweat, but he kept going until he reached 30. When it was over, the man was cut down and dragged away. The crowd dispersed, and Samuel stood there, staring at the blood on the post, trying to understand what he had just done. Over the following months, Samuel carried out dozens of punishments. Whippings were the most common, but there were others. He branded criminals with hot irons, pressing letters into their skin to mark them as thieves or liars. The smell of burning flesh made him gag every time. He locked people into the pillory, a wooden frame that held their head and hands in place while crowds threw rotten food, stones, and worse. He operated the stocks, which pinned people's feet so they could not move while they were publicly humiliated. And once, he was ordered to sever a man's ear as punishment for slander. Samuel had to hold the man's head still while he used a blade to cut through cartilage. The man screamed. Blood poured down his neck. The crowd cheered. Samuel felt like he was going to vomit, but he finished the job because refusing would mean losing his position and facing prosecution himself. Samuel stopped being able to look people in the eye. At first, he told himself he was just doing a job, following orders, enforcing the law. But that justification crumbled quickly. He was hurting people. He was causing pain deliberately, methodically, and publicly. And even though the law said it was justice, Samuel knew what it really was. It was cruelty. His wife noticed the change in him. He stopped talking. He stopped smiling. He flinched when his son touched him, as if he were afraid his hands, the same hands that wielded the whip and the iron, would somehow contaminate the boy. He started drinking at night to quiet the images in his head. The sound of screaming, the smell of burned skin, the look in people's eyes when they realized he was not going to stop. He became a ghost in his own home, present but absent, mechanically moving through the motions of life, while something inside him slowly died. The townspeople hated him. It did not matter that he was following court orders. It did not matter that he was employed by the magistrate. To everyone else, he was the man who hurt people for money. Parents told their children to stay away from him. Shopkeepers served him reluctantly. He attended church, but people refused to sit near him. The priest gave sermons about justice and mercy, but he never once looked at Samuel. Samuel was necessary and despised at the same time. The town needed him to enforce the law, but it punished him for doing exactly that. Think about that. Imagine being hired by the government to inflict pain on other human beings, and then being hated for it. Imagine carrying out punishments you find horrifying because you have no other way to survive. Could you do it? Could you raise a whip and bring it down on someone's back, knowing you have to do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that? And if you did, what would it do to you? The work carried constant danger. Crowds at public punishments were unpredictable. If they sympathized with a condemned person, they could turn violent. Samuel had objects thrown at him multiple times. Once, a group of men rushed the platform during a whipping, trying to free the prisoner. Constables had to intervene, and Samuel barely avoided being attacked. Convicted criminals sometimes fought back. Samuel was struck in the face once by a man in the pillory who managed to break free. Another time, a woman being whipped spat blood at him and cursed him, saying he would rot for what he was doing. Samuel believed her. He went home that night convinced he was damned. He could not stop thinking about her words. He could not stop wondering if she was right. Infection was another risk. The tools Samuel used were rarely cleaned properly. Blood from one person would still be on the whip or the branding iron when he used it on the next. Samuel cut himself once while sharpening the blade used for mutilations. The cut became infected within days. His hand swelled and turned red. He developed a fever. There was no doctor willing to treat him. He recovered only because his wife drained the wound and kept it wrapped. But the scar remained, and every time he looked at it, he was reminded of how close he had come to dying from his own tools. But here is what most people do not know. Punishers were often forced to punish people they knew personally. Small towns meant everyone knew everyone. Samuel was ordered to whip a man he had grown up with, someone who had once been a friend. The man had been convicted of adultery, and the sentence was 20 lashes. Samuel tried to appeal to the magistrate, asking for someone else to carry out the punishment. The magistrate refused. He said if Samuel could not do his job, he would find someone who could. So Samuel whipped his childhood friend in front of a crowd that included people they had both known their entire lives. The friendship ended that day. The man never spoke to Samuel again, and Samuel carried the weight of that betrayal for the rest of his life. The system did not care about personal relationships. It only cared about maintaining control through fear. Now think about this. Your justice system today still punishes people. It uses prisons, fines, probation, and in some places, execution. But it does not do it publicly anymore. It happens behind closed doors, out of sight. Why do you think that is? Is it because society became more humane? Or is it because society realized that watching punishment made people uncomfortable, so it hid the process instead of stopping it? Most public punishers did not last more than a decade. The psychological damage was too severe. Some became alcoholics. Others became violent themselves, unable to separate their work from their personal lives. A few went insane. Samuel lasted 6 years. By the end, he was barely recognizable. He had aged rapidly. His hands shook constantly. He had chronic nightmares. He barely ate. He had stopped attending church entirely because he could not stand the hypocrisy of sitting in a building that preached forgiveness while he was employed to inflict suffering. His wife stayed with him out of obligation, but there was no affection left. His son was old enough now to understand what his father did, and the boy was ashamed. Samuel could see it in his eyes, and that shame was worse than anything the townspeople said. Samuel's final punishment was a branding. A young woman had been convicted of prostitution. The sentence was to brand the letter P on her forehead so everyone would know her crime. Samuel prepared the iron, heating it in the coals until it glowed. The woman was brought to the platform. She was crying, begging the magistrate to reconsider. The magistrate ignored her. Samuel was ordered to proceed. He approached her with the iron. She looked at him with pure terror. And something inside Samuel broke. He could not do it. He dropped the iron and walked off the platform. The crowd went silent. The magistrate shouted at him to come back. Samuel kept walking. He walked out of the square, through the town, and did not stop until he reached the edge of the forest. He never returned. Samuel disappeared. No one knows exactly what happened to him. Some said he lived as a hermit in the woods. Others claimed he walked until he collapsed and died somewhere no one would find him. His wife and son were evicted from their home because Samuel had abandoned his position. The magistrate hired a new punisher within a week. The work continued, and Samuel became just another man destroyed by a job that should never have existed in the first place. He had lasted 6 years. He had carried out hundreds of punishments. And in the end, he could not carry one more. Society needed people like Samuel to maintain order through fear. Public punishment was a tool of control. It was designed to be brutal, visible, and traumatic. The goal was to terrify the population into obedience, and it worked, to some extent. But it only worked because people like Samuel were willing to be the instruments of that cruelty. He did not create the system. He did not write the laws. He just carried them out, and the system destroyed him for it. There were hundreds of public punishers throughout history. Most of them died broken, alcoholic, or insane. Their names are not remembered. Their suffering is not acknowledged. They were necessary and invisible, essential and despised, all at the same time. The practice of public corporal punishment eventually ended. Societies slowly moved toward imprisonment as the primary form of punishment. Public whippings, brandings, and mutilations were outlawed. But that change took centuries. The people who worked as punishers during the worst years had no idea that one day the job would disappear. They just knew that someone had to do it, and they were the ones desperate enough to accept. Samuel was one of them. He inflicted pain because he was paid to. He destroyed lives because the law told him to. And in the process, he destroyed himself. The job existed only because society decided that cruelty was an acceptable response to crime. And when society finally decided otherwise, it did not apologize to the people it had used to carry out that cruelty. It just moved on and pretended they had never existed. Samuel is gone now. The town square where he worked has been rebuilt. The wooden post where prisoners were chained no longer stands. But the question Samuel represents remains. What happens to the people society hires to do the things it later decides were wrong? What happens to the person who follows orders that destroy them? Samuel did not have an answer. He just walked away when he could not do it anymore. And if you think being a public punisher was the most brutal job society ever created, you would be wrong. There were others. Jobs that required even more from the people who did them. Jobs that left deeper scars and fewer survivors. And some of those jobs shaped the world in ways we still live with today.